Ron, as we think about your presidency and what's to come for us, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important to you? And what are your hopes for the future of the actuarial profession in this regard?
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, my diversity career started in 1993 at Nationwide. And I served for 9 years on what was called the Actuarial Diversity Committee at Nationwide. And of course, with IABA, also my involvement there, diversity was a big part of that. So diversity has evolved over the years. Initially, we just call it diversity. And then as you have quite eloquently said, what's the point of diversity if you don't invite the people to contribute? And so then we started talking about inclusion. And then issues of equity came up. And I find this, for some strange reason, the actuarial profession seems to attract people who are fair-minded. Maybe it's just the mathematics that there is a right answer and there is something that is right and fair about life. And so that sort of came into the equation. And nowadays, there are some people who add J for justice. And so they have a DEIJ. So I think the actuarial profession has a lot of work to do and has actually embraced the challenge of incorporating and institutionalizing DEI or DEIJ. The one thing that is a major concern of mine, and I've been public about it even before becoming president, is the problem of minority underrepresentation. Now, I know you are the IABA historian, if not one of the leading historians of our profession. And you know that Robert Randall was the first Black African-American to get fellowship in the Society of Actuaries back in 1952. You will also know that efforts at minority recruiting started in 1969. And I'm sure you know that there was a joint committee. A joint committee of minority recruiting was started in 1977. And joint meant joint SOA CAS. So since 1977, there has always been a joint something. Nowadays, it's called the Joint Committee on Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity. They've got the order of the things in different ways. But the one thing that I think is missing is that we've talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The one thing that's missing is the problem of minority representation. And I have been public about the fact that I would like to see the profession, and I don't mean just the SOA, but the profession, the entire US actual profession, do something about that. And I have written publicly about constructing what I refer to as an actuarial diversity pipeline that would start in middle schools and bring kids forward all the way through to completion of exams, at least all the way through to where employers would find them employable and then take it the rest of the way. But the point of it, in my mind, is it's not just doing that, but it's doing that in such a way that you move the needle on the percentages. It's not just that. And so I advocate for a goal-oriented approach where we literally say that by the year X, and I use 2100 in my particular time horizon, we want to see the percentage of Black actuaries increase from, and by the way, I say fellows, because for too long in this country, Blacks have been told that they need to be settled for less than. And so my goal, I always express it in terms of fellows. And I say, we'd like to see the percentage of fellows in the US actuarial profession, Black fellows, increase from the 1% thereabout that it is these days to more closer to the 10, 12, 13% that we represent in the population. Similar for Latino, similar for Native American. And those are the three groups that have sort of been prioritized at this point in time. And so my thing right now is that if I can see that effort launched in the next 3 years, I would consider that to be my legacy and the best I could do. As Martin Luther King said, I'm not going to get there with you. That's not good. None of us who is on this thing is probably going to be there if it ever gets accomplished. And so if I can see that launched in the next 3 years, I'll be quite pleased.
Wow, that's exciting. And you talk about representation and the fact that you are president-elect and soon to be president will show students that they too can be those things. And so the fact that you and Roosevelt Mosley and Jeff Johnson, your participation matters. It's life-changing because folks can see it and touch it. Before then, they could not.
I want to turn to one of your favorite people. In a recent article that was published in the Actuary, I believe, you discussed the life and legacy of one Robert Randall, FSA 1952. The first, as we've said before, the first Black actuary, and you knew him personally, and you consider him a mentor, and I would go so far as to say hero of yours. Tell me about that relationship, or tell us about that relationship, and exactly what he means to you.
Yeah, thanks, John. Robert J. Randall Sr. Bob was at first an inspiration for me. I told you I found out about the profession at the summer actuarial program at Howard University. Bob was actually one of the speakers. And that was my first introduction to Bob Randall. And all you could do is sit there in awe. As we just talked about, I could see it. Somebody had become an FSA, not just somebody. The first was sitting right there in front of me, and I was in awe. And I didn't see Bob again until 2 years later, 92, at the founding of IABA. And so I actually got a chance to shake his hand, and you're trembling, you're a college student, you got a chance to meet the first. I also met the first Black fellow of the CAS at that time, Ollie Sherman, 1984. And so that too was historic and meaningful for me. I took some time away from IABA largely because the next year didn't have a meeting. It had one the following year, but I had just started at Cigna. So it wasn't until 96 that I convinced Cigna to let us come back, and actually pay for that thing. And so once I got back, developed a relationship and a mentoring relationship with both Bob and Ollie.
Okay.
And Bob would coach me on some things. He was long retired by that time, but being retired, he wasn't retired. Social Security was a passion for Bob. And the impacts of Social Security on African Americans was a passion for Bob. And so it was really interesting to see a retired actuary, the first Black actuary, to still be engaged and involved in issues about our profession. And so that was enlightening for me. And then I started doing something crazy. I started gathering all the Black interns in Hartford, Connecticut. Didn't matter if you worked for Cigna, Travelers, Hartford, Aetna, didn't matter who you worked for. If you were a Black intern, I was going to take you to meet Robert J. Randall Sr. so he could have the same impact. Bob was down in Stamford, Connecticut, Norwalk, Stamford, Connecticut, about an hour and a half south of us. And so I get us all in a caravan. I don't know where the liability insurance actuaries were. I'm taking these mama's babies, away from their designated place.
That's right.
down to Norwalk, Connecticut. And we go down and we'd have breakfast with Bob and Doris. Doris is his wife. They have been married for well over 50 years, the love of his life. And they would sit down and Doris would cook a French breakfast for us. French toast, all of these things. And she'd have mimosas. And so not only am I taking these babies away from their designated place, I'm also giving them alcohol.
Oh no.
As they're meeting the first Black actuary. And I was so proud of all of our interns. They asked fantastic questions. I remember one asking, Bob, now that you're retired, what do you do? And Doris chimed in, anything I tell him to. and we so the relationship grew from being an inspiration to being a mentor to being a friend. They really took me under their wing. Bob continued to coach me. I made some mistakes as president of IBA. And Bob would sit me down and say, The only thing I've ever been disappointed in you, Thompson, is that you did this.
X.
And so that piece was sobering for me, but very few people could have that conversation with me. And so I love them. I'm a poet. I have written poetry, and
Mm.
I've written a few poems about Bob.
Mm-hmm.
One called "And Then There Was One," recognizing the fact that he was the first to be fully certified, but then demanding that at some point in history that he be able to say, "And then there was 100." And so Bob's influence on making sure that we pushed for more fellows. At the time IABA was founded, there were less than 25. So think about it, from 52 to 92, 40 years, we had gone from only one to 25.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm so excited that we're well over 225 since that time of 92. So in the 30-year period since then, we've grown more than 200. And that piece is exciting. And it has a lot to do with the inspiration, the mentorship, and the friendship that Bob Randall gave to me and gave to so many others. And so a hero for sure. One of the plaques behind my wall is named after Bob Randall, and IABA was kind enough, I believe it was Jeff, was kind enough to give me a Robert J. Randall Senior Pioneer Award for really having an influence on IABA, and that just means the world to me, and so I keep that piece highlighted.
Nice.
And so what advice would you give to actuaries considering a leadership role? What's it take to be a John Robinson, not just in IABA, but in the SOA and in the broader actuarial community? What's that look like?
Well, Stafford, I am so glad you asked me this question. So here is what you need to do. I put this one in there just for you. The first thing I'll say, and I'm going to talk generally. I know Jeff is listening in. He is a big academy guy. He got to vice president in the academy. And whether it be academy, SOA, whatever it is, the first thing you have to do is to compile some kind of volunteer record in whatever organization you choose and whichever one you love. So that'll be the first thing. Um, um, Make yourself known make your interest known to the nominating committee. You know, just about in every situation, there's a nominating committee. In the SOA, you self-nominate, and then the nominating committee reviews you for suitability, as it were. I'm not quite sure. I think in the academy, the nominating committee invites people to be a part of it. I think that's true for the CAS. Not sure, but nothing prevents you from telling them that you are interested in whatever the role might be. Um, the next thing I'll say is, which is going to be necessary, especially if there's voting, and in the SOA, there's a lot of voting. You're going to have to grow your network. And I regard this as kind of a unique strength of mine, that for some reason I'm known around the world. The Caribbean, the usual places you can imagine, all of the Caribbean actors in Canada and others. I'm known in Ghana. During the campaign, I called people in Egypt. I called people in the Philippines. I talk to people in South Africa. I've had people write to me from South Africa who I never met, saying they're going to vote for me. So it helps to make yourself known. And the easiest way I can think of is on LinkedIn. During my campaign, LinkedIn, I think, really was the key, because I would post something, and then those people who were my supporters would repost it to their own groups, their followers. And so I would constantly be getting notes, such and such, sent something that you posted after their 183 or 200 followers. So that sort of thing, getting yourself known on LinkedIn. As if there was just one thing that you wanted to do, that would probably be the most effective thing. Uh, uh, um, what else? The other thing I will advise folks, I know that in the IABA, there are a lot of folks who don't have their fellowship, but do have good leadership skills. If you want to be at the top of the profession, you're going to have to get your fellowship. And so I do encourage folks, if you do aspire to that, to make sure you get that done. Um, when I was considering running, I had some hesitance. And I will tell you quite honestly what that hesitance was, which is that I felt like the people who run and who the nominating committee tends to like are folks who have had high office in their companies, like you and above. You put me up against a chief actuary, or someone who has been big in the academy, and I think the nominating committee has what I would regard as kind of a natural bias towards that sort of reputation on paper. And I say that because if I were on the nominating committee, I think I would have that very same bias. And that caused me to hesitate. And then I talked to, a couple of people about that. And I said, and actually one of the persons I talked to is a chief actuary of a major company. And the person said, no, don't let that prevent you from running. And so I think where I end up is that I think my election is proof positive that you will be judged by the content of your character. And some of those other things that we think are valuable will not be as valuable. I do think I think that's the case. I think we have established that, and um, and I expect that to continue into the future in terms of how the nominating committee looks at candidates. I do think, however, that the death of George Floyd last year did cause some kind of reevaluation of the criteria. And I think diversity was perhaps more of a criteria in the minds of, even if it's only subconsciously, in the minds of nominating committee members than it might have been in previous years. I tried and failed back in 2017. And so I encourage people to aspire to it. Stafford, I know you have a saying, you talked about there being one, and to the extent that, to the effect of, well, when there's one, there needs to be two. Would you share that piece of wisdom with us?
Yeah, what I've said is that if there's only one, it's easy for that one to become a footnote in history. That really it takes that second one to move from just an aberration to something that becomes more of a trend. And so I've been a huge fan of Robert J. Randall being the first. But if there wasn't a Larkin Teasley to really break that ice and show us that there could be more, then I don't think we'd be at the 225 plus that we are. And likewise, we can't let John Robinson or Roosevelt Mosley or Jeff Johnson become a footnote in history. There has to be more than one in order for us to really see that this is a trend, something that's attainable, and that truly the content of the character is what supersedes the color of the skin.
So we've talked about the past, going all the way back to the beginning, and we've sort of brought ourselves to where we are today. And we'll spend a little time looking at the future. Um, so what are your wishes? Now you speak from the, from a corporate perspective, but also an IABA perspective. What are your wishes for the future of the actuarial profession?
Yeah, my wishes are very similar in nature to yours, John. One, I wanted to continue and be even more so a profession of merit, a profession that attracts the best and the brightest, especially our diverse communities, retains those communities throughout its certification process, and really deploys them into industry, but not just the insurance industry, into industry as a whole in order to make a difference socially, make a difference psychologically, make a difference economically. I really believe, and I've always believed, that the actuarial profession has that power, and it does do that in the places where it has influence. So It does need to therefore grow its influence. We say today that Microsoft has an actuary and Uber has an actuary. And I really do want to see our profession expand to the point where we are influencing climate change, influencing the health of all Americans, influencing retirement and Social Security and all of those things, but also influencing technology, influencing social justice, influencing civil. Actuaries have the opportunity to impact all of those things. And I want that badly for the profession. But I wanted to do it in a diverse, inclusive, equitable, and just manner as well. I've seen that acronym rearranged as JEDI for all of us Star
That's
Wars
right.
fans: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so those things are important for me. I do agree with having a strategic plan, and I want to see presidents like you execute that strategic plan. But I'm looking forward to the thumbprint of John Robinson on this profession, the thumbprint of Roosevelt Mosley and Jeff Johnson on this global actuarial profession. And that's the other thing, is I really do want us to get out of a national mindset and really be in an international mindset. We have members across the world, and yet I still think and find that our exams tend to be nationally focused. Our thought process are often nationally focused. And the first international role I ever had, I found that the skill set was valuable and the culture was different. And so that piece, I really want people to know and understand what it truly means to be an international and inclusive profession. So those are my hopes for the actuarial profession. I know they line up similar to some of your hopes and thoughts as we move forward. But you actually get the opportunity to do something about this thing, Doc. So you're the president-elect and vice president of the SOA. You're also the first Black actuary to be elected to this position. What are you hoping to accomplish during your tenure? And what does success look like in the 3 years that you get to be involved at this very high level?
Thank you very much. 3 years is a short time, and so I don't intend to create a long list and then disappoint myself and others. And so, as I said in the campaign, in my campaign video, there are two things. The first is the SOA has embarked on what we call a long-term growth strategy. And I'm still finding out, gradually what it is, because I wasn't around as it was developed. Um, and so, in any case, whatever it is, that as I learn more and more about it, one of the things I want to make sure, to the best of my ability, is that we make the wisest decisions that we can, for the future. And so, so that in sort of a general way is how I hope to see the next 3 years. The other thing, which as of today is sort of tangentially related to the long-term growth strategy. I know they're talking about growth, and I know there is concern about minority representation, but I want to see the problem solved, and I want us put on a path to not just acknowledge it, not just do more, but actually put us on a path to where we say, this is the goal that we have for 2100, and we're going to put in some serious intentional steps to get us there. So if I can see that launched in the next 3 years, that's about all that I'll be able to influence to have that happen. Um, and so I think we're getting to the end of this, and you get the last word, Stafford, and maybe it takes you back over things that you've already said, but what would you like your legacy to be?
Yeah, I appreciate it, John. Those that know me know that I'm a huge Muhammad Ali fan. And when young Cassius Clay knocked out Sonny Liston for the first time, he jumped up on the ropes and said, I shook up the world. I
Mhm.
shook up the world. I told you. Then he was talking about him becoming heavyweight champion of the world. That young Cassius Clay would never foresee what Muhammad Ali became, and the fact that he did in fact shake up the world, but not because of just boxing, because he got involved, and he literally got involved with civil rights, and he got involved with those other things that literally shook up the world. And so if I did have a legacy, it would be that I helped set a foundation for IABA and for the actuarial profession that literally changed the world, that encouraged young folks who didn't have an opportunity or didn't know that an opportunity even existed to come be a part of something that can be life-changing. Yeah, I'll make a few dollars in my career that allow me to set up scholarships for my family such that anybody who ever wants to go to college will have that opportunity. And I'll appreciate that opportunity. But leaving a legacy that long after you and I have gone from this place, that folks can look back from your 2100 date and be able to say, yeah, those guys really influenced how we got here today. And not sure we'd be the same if it wasn't for their vision, their strategy, their execution, and their passion in their heyday. And so that's what I really want, is to have that long lasting impact, that in 2100 they can look back at a John Robinson, at a Stafford Thompson, at a Jeff Johnson, a Sharon Robinson, a Roosevelt Mosley, and say, yep, it started back then, and we're so happy that it did.
Stafford, thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of our program. This has been a delight. I think it took a lot longer than we might have estimated, but the folks at SOA were good enough to let us keep talking and talking. I know Jeff is in the background. Thank you, Jeff, for your role. Thank you for your leadership and your friendship. Thank you, Stafford, for your leadership and your friendship, which is hardly ended for any of us. So with that, I will sign off. Thank you so much.